She leaned across the restaurant table, wine glass in hand, laughing with her friends like I wasn't sitting 2 feet away. "He's sweet," she said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "He's honestly so sweet, but come on, you guys know me, he's just so far below my level." They all laughed, all 5 of them. Glasses clinking, heads thrown back, like it was the funniest thing anyone had said all evening. I didn't say a word. I just set down my fork, picked up my napkin, and folded it slowly. Then I looked at her, really looked at her. And I smiled. Not the kind of smile that means you're in on the joke. The kind of smile that means the joke just ended. "Then you're going to love life without me," I said, and I kept my voice calm, measured, like I was commenting on the weather. I stood up, walked to the host station, paid the entire bill without saying another word to anyone at that table, and walked out into the cold night air. That was 9 months ago. And if you think that moment was the end of something, you're wrong. That moment was the beginning of everything. But before I tell you how it ended, you need to understand how we got there. Because this story isn't really about one dinner or one ugly sentence spoken in a restaurant. It's about 2 years of a man slowly disappearing inside a relationship piece by piece, until one night a woman's careless laugh handed him back everything he'd given away. My name is Garrett Webb. I'm 36 years old, and until 9 months ago, I ran a mid-sized logistics software company called ClearPath Systems out of Columbus, Ohio. Not a household name. Not Silicon Valley money. But good, honest work that I'd built with 7 years of 60-hour weeks, 2 failed business partnerships, and 1 apartment so small my desk and my bed were separated by exactly 4 feet. Before I tell you anything else, I need you to subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell. Because if this story resonates with you, even a little, then you need to be here for the ones that come next. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever been in a moment where someone showed you exactly who they were, and you had to choose whether to believe them? Let's get into it. I met Vanessa Drake at a product launch event 2 years before that dinner. She worked in marketing for a tech firm downtown, the kind of person who walked into a room and immediately recalibrated everyone's energy toward her. Dark hair, sharp humor, the kind of confidence that made you feel like getting her attention was an achievement worth having. Which, looking back, was the first problem. I was there with a business contact named Drew, who kept nudging me every time Vanessa laughed at something across the room. "That's Vanessa Drake," he said, like he was pointing out a landmark. "She's been on 3 industry panels this year. Everybody knows her." I didn't pursue her that night. I went back to my drink and my conversation and my booth. But she came to me. She slid in beside Drew and me near the end of the evening, reached past me to grab a cocktail napkin and said, "You're the ClearPath guy, aren't you? I read your article on last-mile routing algorithms. It was actually interesting." Actually interesting was the highest compliment Vanessa gave anyone. I learned that later. We exchanged numbers. We had coffee 3 days later. And within 6 weeks, I was rearranging my entire life around her schedule. I want to be honest here, because honesty is the whole point of this story. The early version of Vanessa and me was genuinely good. She was brilliant in a way that made every conversation feel like exercise. She challenged my thinking on business decisions and personal ones. She had opinions about everything from restaurant wine lists to municipal infrastructure, and most of the time, she wasn't wrong. I respected her mind before I fell in love with her face, which is the right order of operations. It's just that I missed some signs that should have told me what that mind thought of people who weren't quite on her level. Vanessa had a group of 5 close friends. Priya, Caitlin, Madison, Jordan, and Lexa. They'd all known each other since college. They brunch together every Sunday, text each other constantly, and operate as a kind of unified social organism. The first time I met them, Priya shook my hand and said, "She's told us so much about you," in the tone of voice that meant she hadn't told them anything particularly glowing. I filed that away and smiled and ordered a round of drinks for the table, because that's what I do. I'm the guy who shows up, handles the bill, fills the silence, makes sure the night works. My family always called it being generous. I'm starting to think some people call it something else. The first year was good. Not perfect, but good. Vanessa and I traveled to Portland and Denver. I met her parents, who were pleasant and slightly baffled by my career, the way people who've only ever worked for large corporations are baffled by anyone who built something from scratch. Her father, Richard, had worked for the same insurance company for 31 years, and he looked at my 7-year entrepreneurial story the way you look at a man who climbed a mountain without ropes. Impressed but uncomfortable. We disagreed about money a fair amount. Vanessa had expensive tastes and a corresponding salary that supported them. She wasn't asking me to fund her lifestyle. But she had a way of framing financial choices that subtly positioned my preferences as lesser. The restaurant I suggested was fine, but have you been to Ardor? The vacation I booked was sweet, but her friend Madison had literally just come back from Positano and said it was life-changing. Small things, the kind of things you don't make a case out of because individually each one is nothing. But water carves canyons, doesn't it? And I was the canyon. Somewhere in the second year, I started noticing that I was editing myself constantly around Vanessa's friends. I would start a sentence and then reroute it based on how I imagined their reactions. I stopped mentioning my work as often because Priya had this habit of tilting her head slightly when I talked about logistics software, like I was describing a hobby rather than a company with 11 employees and a $2.3 million annual revenue. I stopped suggesting restaurants because Caitlin always had a better one. I started dressing differently for group dinners, not because Vanessa asked me to, but because I could feel their eyes do a quick inventory of me every time I walked in. That's a specific kind of slow damage, the kind where no one does anything overtly terrible, but by the end of it, you've hollowed yourself out to fit a space that was never quite shaped for you. My brother Kyle noticed first. He lives in Cincinnati, and we have dinner every time he passes through Columbus for work, which is about once a month. About 4 months before the restaurant night, he sat across from me over steaks and said, "You seem smaller." What does that mean? I don't know exactly. You used to walk in somewhere and just take up space. Good space. Like you belonged wherever you showed up. Now you kind of check before you sit down. I told him he was being dramatic. He told me he was being accurate. We argued about it for 10 minutes and then changed the subject. But I thought about what he said for a long time afterward. Because Kyle doesn't traffic in poetry. He says what he observes. And what he observes tends to be true. The dinner that changed everything was a birthday celebration for Caitlin. She turned 32. Vanessa had been planning it for 3 weeks, which is how I knew it was important to her. She was the kind of person who planned things that were important with the energy most people reserve for military operations. The restaurant was called Solène, the kind of place with lighting so dim you couldn't read the menu without squinting, and where the bread cost $12 because it comes in a linen bag. I'd been there once before on a client dinner. The food was genuinely excellent. There were 7 of us at the table: Vanessa, her 5 friends, and me. I was the only man there, which was fine. I was used to being the peripheral figure at these events. I ordered well, kept the wine moving, told a story about a logistics disaster in Atlanta that got a legitimate laugh from most of the table. I thought the evening was going reasonably well. And then Jordan said something about a guy she'd briefly dated, someone she'd met at a conference. She was describing why she'd ended it, and she said, "He was nice, really nice. But you know how some guys are just too nice to actually be interesting?" "Oh, completely," Caitlin said. And then Vanessa laughed and leaned toward the table slightly and said it. "I know exactly what you mean. Garrett's like that, honestly." Looked around at her friends like she was sharing something warm. "He's just so sweet. He really is. But sometimes I look at him and I think..." She paused, choosing her words with the deliberate pleasure of someone who knows she has an audience. "He's just so below my level." 5 women laughed. I was sitting right there, 2 feet from Vanessa, contributing to the cost of the meal, one of which I'd been paying for more often than not over the past 2 years. Sitting inside a relationship that I had bent myself into a smaller version of myself to maintain. And they laughed. I didn't feel rage. I want to be clear about that because rage would have been a reasonable response, and I understand why you might expect it. What I felt was something quieter and much more final. It was the sound of a door closing gently on its own, not slammed, just done. I set down my fork. I folded my napkin. I looked at Vanessa and I said the words, "Then you're going to love life without me." The laughing stopped. Priya's eyes went wide. Madison put down her glass. Vanessa's expression cycled through confusion, then panic, then the kind of controlled composure she deployed when she needed to save face in professional situations. "Garrett, I know," I said. And I did. She wasn't saying something she didn't mean in the heat of the moment. She was saying something she meant all the time, and had been careless enough to say out loud. I stood up, excused myself to nobody in particular, and walked to the host station. The total was $340, including the bottle of Burgundy Vanessa had selected. I paid it in full, added 22% tip because the server had done nothing wrong, and walked out of Solène and into the night. I didn't call or text. I drove home, made myself a cup of coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and felt the peculiar lightness of a man who has just put down something very heavy. Vanessa called 11 times between 9 p.m. and midnight. I didn't answer. She texted, starting formal and then progressively less so. By the 4th message, she was explaining. By the 7th, she was angry. By the 11th, she was saying things that, had she said them at the restaurant, would have saved us both a lot of time. I turned off my phone and went to bed at 10:30, the best sleep I'd had in months. What I didn't expect was the text I got the next morning from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't open it, but the first few words were visible in the preview, and they were enough to make me sit down with my coffee. The message said, "This is Priya. I got your number from Vanessa's phone. I know you probably don't want to hear from any of us, but I need to tell you something, and I need to tell you that I'm sorry." I read that text 5 times. Then I responded. What Priya told me over the next 2 hours of back-and-forth messages fundamentally altered my understanding of the past 2 years. She told me that Vanessa had been talking about me that way to her friends for most of our relationship. Not maliciously, Priya said, but casually. Like it was simply understood that Garrett was the sweet, reliable guy Vanessa was with right now, but that right now was the operative phrase. "She's been talking to someone else for about 3 months, Priya wrote. "I didn't know how serious it was until last night. After you left, she called him from the parking lot. I heard part of it. She was laughing." I read that sentence a few times. Then I wrote back, "Why are you telling me this?" And Priya's answer was the one that stuck with me more than anything else from that whole period. She wrote, "Because last night was the first time in 2 years that I saw you be completely yourself. And I realized we've been watching someone disappear and calling it love." I put my phone down on the kitchen counter and stood at my window for a long time, looking out at the street below my apartment building, watching a man walk his dog, watching a UPS truck double park, and a delivery driver jog up the steps of the building across the street. Normal Tuesday morning things. I wasn't angry. I wasn't devastated the way I thought I'd be. I was quiet in the way you get quiet when something finally makes sense after a long time of not making sense. I called Kyle. He answered on the second ring. I told him what had happened, the dinner, the drive home, Priya's texts. He listened to all of it without interrupting, which is how I know when Kyle is taking something seriously, because normally he interrupts constantly. When I finished, he said, "Do you remember what I told you 4 months ago? That I seemed smaller." "Yeah. Do you understand what I meant now?" I did. "Here's what I want you to do," Kyle said. "Nothing dramatic, nothing angry. I want you to spend the next 30 days building something, working on your business, calling the people you've been neglecting, and let Vanessa figure out her own situation. Can you do that?" I said yes. "One more thing," he said. "I want you to call Jordan." "Why Jordan?" "Because Jordan's the one who started the whole too nice to be interesting conversation, right? Which means she's the one who handed Vanessa the rope." "I don't want to play games." "I'm not telling you to play games. I'm telling you to make one phone call, be honest, and see what happens. You're not a small person, Garrett. Stop letting other people write your story." I thought about that for a day. Then I called Jordan. Now I want to stop here for a second because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking this is about to become a story where the ex-girlfriend's friend becomes the love interest and everything wraps up with a bow. And I want to be honest with you. Life doesn't work that way. Or at least mine didn't. Not in the way you'd expect. Jordan and I talked for about 40 minutes on the phone. She was direct in a way that Vanessa's other friends weren't. She said she'd thought about what happened at dinner and that she felt implicated in it because she'd started the thread that led to Vanessa's comment. She wasn't apologizing for Vanessa. She was apologizing for her own role. "Did you agree with her?" I asked. "About the level thing?" There was a long pause. "Honestly," Jordan said, "I think Vanessa is one of the most capable people I know, and I think she has genuinely terrible judgment about what to value in a man. You're not below her level, Garrett. You're just a different kind of person than she has in her head as a goal." That was a generous way of saying something I'd suspected for a while. Vanessa didn't want a partner. She wanted an accessory that matched her ambition. Something warm and present that didn't challenge her version of herself. Jordan and I kept talking, not romantically, not at first, just honestly. She worked in healthcare administration, ran half marathons on weekends, and had a kind of grounded practicality that felt like fresh air after 2 years of Vanessa's curated perfection. We grabbed coffee twice over the next few weeks. Nothing more than that. Two people having honest conversations while their mutual friend's life quietly rearranged itself in the background. Vanessa reached out 3 times in the month after the restaurant. Once to apologize, which she did in a long and beautifully written message that explained what she'd meant and why it came out wrong and how much she valued our time together. I read it twice and didn't respond for a week. When I did, I said 3 things: that I accepted her apology, that I wished her well, and that I was confident we weren't right for each other. Clean, honest, final. She tried again 2 weeks later, this time with less explanation and more emotion. Said she missed me. Said the guy she'd been seeing wasn't who she thought he was. Said she'd been doing a lot of thinking. I replied that I was glad she was doing some thinking, that I was too, and that I hoped she found what she was looking for. The 3rd time was a phone call at 11 at night, a week after that. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "Why aren't you angrier?" she asked immediately. No greeting. "Because anger would mean I was still trying to change something," I said. "I hurt you, Garrett. Don't pretend I didn't." "You did," I said. "And I let you for a lot longer than I should have. That's on me as much as it's on you." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "The guy I was talking to, it's nothing. It was never anything." "I believe you," I said. And I did. "But that's not actually the issue, Vanessa. The issue is that you sat at a table with your friends, with me right there, and said I was below your level. And every person at that table laughed because none of them were surprised. That's not something that happens once. That's something that's been happening in every room I wasn't in for 2 years." She didn't argue with that. "I thought you needed someone like me," she said finally. "I thought that's what you wanted." And that was the sentence that unlocked everything for me, because she wasn't entirely wrong. I had wanted someone like her. Someone polished and certain and socially fluent in rooms I'd always found slightly uncomfortable. I'd wanted her validation in ways I hadn't admitted to myself, and she had sensed that wanting and mistaken it for a complete picture of me. "I needed someone who saw me," I said, "not someone who positioned me." We ended the call a few minutes later, not bitterly, just done. Here is what the next 6 months looked like. I invested $180,000 in expanding ClearPath's route optimization platform into a new sector, municipal waste management contracting, something my operations director Dominic had been pushing for 8 months, and I'd been too distracted to properly evaluate. Within 4 months, we had 2 pilot contracts in Ohio and 1 in Indiana. It's performing beyond our projections. I called people I'd let drift. Old college friends, a business mentor named Al Brunner who'd helped me structure the company back in year 2, my cousin in Philadelphia who I hadn't spoken to properly in over a year. Every conversation felt like reopening a window that had been painted shut. I started running again. Not because a relationship had ended and I needed something healthy to do, but because Kyle bet me $100 I couldn't run a 5K in under 28 minutes, and I have a problem with losing bets to my younger brother. And I kept talking to Jordan. I want to be careful about how I tell this part because Jordan deserves to be described honestly and not as a plot point in someone else's story. She was not the rebound. She was not the contrast to Vanessa designed to make a point. She was a person I started to know slowly and carefully, the way you know someone when you're not performing anything for anyone. We didn't define things for a long time. We just spent time together. Went to a farmer's market, argued about a documentary, drove out to a state park on a Saturday because neither of us had anything else to do, and the weather was too good to waste. She met Kyle when he was passing through Columbus, and he texted me afterward to say, "That's a real person." That was his highest compliment. About 3 months after the restaurant, Jordan and I were sitting in her kitchen eating pasta she'd made, and she said, "Can I tell you something that's going to sound strange?" "Sure." "The night of the dinner, before you left, I watched your face when Vanessa said that, and I thought, he's going to fold. I thought he was going to make a joke out of it, or go quiet, or find some way to make her feel better about what she said. Men do that. I've watched it happen 100 times. But you didn't fold," Jordan said. "You just picked up your napkin and said what you said. And I thought, oh, there he is." I didn't know what to say to that. "I texted you," she said. "Not because I felt guilty. That was partly true, but mostly I texted you because I wanted to know if the person I saw for 10 seconds in that restaurant was who you actually were." "And?" She smiled. "Jury's still out." 9 months later. ClearPath just signed our 4th municipal contract. Dominic keeps sending me texts with upward-pointing graphs. I've started running with genuine consistency, not out of discipline, but because I actually like the hour of silence it gives me. I called Al Brunner last month and we had a 3-hour lunch that ended with him agreeing to come on as a part-time strategic advisor. Kyle lost the bet. I ran that 5K in 26:44. Vanessa, from what I understand through the thin thread of mutual connections that still exists, is doing well, dating someone new, posting the kind of social media content that suggests contentment, whether or not that's the full story. I don't think about her as much as I expected to, not because what we had wasn't real, but because the person I was inside that relationship wasn't fully real, and it's hard to miss a version of yourself that was always a little off. Priya sent me a message about 4 months ago. She said she'd started therapy partly because of what had happened. That sitting at that table had made her think about a few of her own relationships differently. I told her I was glad something useful had come from it, and that I hoped she was doing okay. She said she was. Jordan is sitting in my apartment right now, reading something on her laptop, wearing one of my sweaters that she borrowed in November and has not returned. I made coffee. She corrected my ratio because apparently I don't use enough grounds, and she is irritatingly correct about this. This is what contentment actually looks like. Not a dinner at Solène with dim lighting and a $12 bread bag. Not someone telling you that you've reached their level or fallen below it. Just a person at your kitchen table who sees you clearly and has no interest in ranking you. Here's what I learned from all of it. For 2 years, I accepted a diminished version of myself because I'd convinced myself the diminishment was the cost of admission to something worthwhile. That the gap between who I was in my own head and who I allowed myself to be in Vanessa's world was a reasonable trade for what the relationship gave me. It wasn't. It was never reasonable. I was paying a fare that shouldn't have been charged. The night everything ended, I didn't plan an exit strategy. I didn't calculate. I just heard something said out loud that had been said silently 100 times, and my body refused before my brain could catch up. Sometimes the most important thing you do is the thing you do before you've had time to talk yourself out of it. My father used to say, "Don't show people who you are with your explanations. Show them with your exits." He was talking about business negotiations, but it turns out the principle is transferable. I walked out of a restaurant 9 months ago with nothing but my jacket and a paid bill. And in that exit, I found the version of myself I'd been slowly mailing off in small packages to someone who didn't know what to do with him. I'd recommend it. The walking out, I mean. Not the 2 years of shrinking first. That part you can skip if you're willing to believe your brother when he tells you that you seem smaller. Believe the people who love you when they tell you that. They can see you better than the people who are measuring you. My personal take. The exit strategy. What I love about Garrett's story is the clarity of that final moment. In business, Garrett knows when a deal is no longer profitable, but in his personal life, he was subsidizing a relationship that was bankrupting his self-esteem. Vanessa didn't just insult him. She showed him that she was the only one playing a game of levels while he was trying to build a life. The most powerful part wasn't the breakup, it was the silence. He didn't argue, he didn't try to prove he was on her level, and he didn't wait for an apology. He simply paid the bill and walked out. He realized that if you have to explain your worth to someone, they've already decided you don't have any. My takeaway? Never shrink yourself to fit into someone else's narrow world. Garrett was a CEO with a multi-million-dollar company, but he let himself feel small because he was looking for validation in the wrong mirror. Sometimes the best way to level up is to leave the room where you're being looked down upon. And as his brother Kyle said, believe the people who see your light, not the ones who try to dim it.